Okay, hi guys, and welcome to the show. And today we are finally dueling these two juggernauts of aviation watches. We are, of course, talking about the Breitling Navitimer. This is my personal Breitling Navitimer. I've become a huge Navitimer fan. I always kind of was. I just put off buying it for the longest time, as you guys know. And of course, the Sinn 903. This is the latest version of the 903 in black, and quick shout out to my good friend GCR for lending it in and making this duel possible. Before I get into this particular duel, I've got to do a wristwatch check, and I am actually wearing my own Sinn. Last night I went to see Dunkirk. I do not own an Omega Weems watch, although I do love them. They're very, very rare. The Omega Weems featured. It was definitely a plot device in the movie. A great, fantastic movie, worn by Tom Hardy's character, piloting a Spitfire. Doesn't get any cooler than that. Inspired today's choice, and a little ode to the RAF. I'm wearing it on the NATO there. Now, if you're unfamiliar with how this works, I run through 10 categories. I mark it out to 10. That is basically pretty much self-explanatory, except for design differs from style is more aesthetics, design is more how it's designed to serve its purpose. But I'll explain as I go. Now, please do keep your own scores if you want to play along, and then do share them in the comments when at the end. And I'm using this tube map. Two reasons. Firstly, because it's horologically related with that beautiful gilt tube themed. You see the tunnel there is where the pendulum swings. Very, very cool. Got this last time I was in London. I nearly slipped it and gave the scores away. Anyway, so yeah, it's just the perfect size, and I'll slide it down as we go through. We should get a little bit of history out of the way first, because the immediate, I guess the elephant in the room is, why are they so similar? Now, a few people mistakenly believe that Sinn is an homage of the Breitling Navitimer. Not at all. The Navitimer is, of course, one of the most instantly recognizable iconic watches of all time, predating the Speedy and the Submariner, actually. Released in the early 50s, there is a little bit of speculation on the exact date, but I think the first released in 54, although it does date back to the very early 50s in its design. But it is one of the big iconic watches. Breitling had a bit of a wobbly in the 70s during the quartz crisis, and they sold off a lot of their assets, including the rights to produce the Navitimer, and I think the Cosmonaut too. Helmut Sinn, who's a former pilot himself, an engineer, and then turned into a watchmaker, bought the rights and was able to make his own version, which is the Sinn 903. And I think part of the deal was that they weren't allowed to call it the Navitimer, so they referred to it as the 903, the navigation chronograph, or it's basically just the 903. For all intent and purposes, it is a Navitimer, just made by a different company. Although, as we get into this, you'll see there are some beautifully kind of nuanced differences between them. So the first category is value. Now, as you see, I gave the Sinn 10 out of 10, and the Navitimer 8. This will make more sense later on, as you'll see what you really get for the money. I just think the Sinn is a better bang per buck watch. No corners have been cut. It's also more affordable than the Breitling, and like pretty much all Sinns, including the one I'm wearing, they really do hold their value extremely well. To such an extent, they give the Navitimer from Breitling a run for its money. I think the Navitimer gets an 8, which is still a very strong score, but bear in mind, I think you get a lot more watch for the money when you buy the Sinn, and it will become apparent in just a moment. The Navitimer does hold its value well, although you can find them heavily discounted on the used market. Anyway, let's move it down to design. Again, we get another lead here, in my opinion, by the Sinn. I think the design of the Sinn, if we look back at the early Navitimers, they haven't really changed that much. The Sinn has evolved, and it has been carefully, I would say, improved. The Navitimer, apart from a change of movements, has not dramatically changed at all. It's still a relatively, I mean, obviously the materials, the sapphire glass and the movements have changed. Now, I guess you could argue, well, why would you, if it's not broke, you know, don't fix it, or however the saying goes. But truthfully, I think it's become a little bit dated, and that's why I think it only gets an 8. It still is the undisputed original Navitimer, but as we see with the Sinn here, the Sinn is well, for a start, we have an inner rotating bezel. I think a far more efficient and accurate. You've got a screw down crown. You've got a quick set date, which this has. It does have a rapidly changing date, but you have to pull it back to the 9, and if you saw my 5 loves and hates about the Navitimer, it is a bit of an annoyance. Also, have a look at the bracelet. Look at the Allen key style pins there. Incredible. Also, you get a display back. When it comes to their scale, they both have 22mm lug width. They're both the same diameter in this particular version. The Sinn only comes in this 41mm size. The height is almost the same. The Sinn, strangely, a little bit thicker due to its improved case, which we'll discuss later. Both, of course, completely stainless steel. So I just think this has been taken to that next level, whereas Navitimer is a little bit resting on its laurels. It's the icon, you know, it almost doesn't really have to make an effort. Anyway, let's move on to the movements. Now, this is quite interesting. The Navitimer has gone through a long list of changes, obviously from the early Venus 178s in the late 50s to the Valjoux 7736, the Valjoux 72. There was even quartz Navitimers during the mid-70s. Breitling these days do offer their own in-house caliber movements and a range of complications, from GMTs to even the 2017 Basel World release of a Navitimer with a rattrapante, or rattrapante, if you want to pronounce it the French way. One of the big advantages and benefits of the 7750 from Valjoux, although it's as common as muck, literally any competent watchmaker can service and repair them. Oh, and I neglect to mention Lemania as well. The Sinn started off with the Lemania, then it progressed to the Valjoux 7750, which is what you have in the Navitimer here. This particular one, this most contemporary Sinn, we have the Sellita SW500, which is pretty much a Valjoux 7750 clone. The SW50 operates at the same vibrations now at 28,800. They're both 25 jewel movements, self-winding obviously. They both have a unidirectional winding, both hackable, and both with the date tucked away at the 430 position. They are also both decorated. Unfortunately, you can't see the Breitling movement. If we look at the beautiful attention to detail we see in the Sellita, we have Geneva stripes, blued screws, fantastically chamfered edges, pelage work. It's just gorgeous, and of course, lovely signed rotor there. So no expense has been spared, but I still give the edge to the Navitimer because the Breitling is chronometer certified. Sinn performs incredibly well, and we'll get to performance a little bit later on, but the Navitimer has the edge there. It's operating within cost parameters. The Sinn not far off, and I suspect it's been regulated from my personal experience of buying Sinns. They always perform impeccably well. I mean, it's almost COSC there, but it is not a COSC grade. The setup, of course, is exactly the same, 12-hour chronograph with the seconds of the main time at the 9 o'clock, subdial at the 6. We have the 12 hours for the chronograph, and then the 30-minute subdial at the 3 o'clock. So pretty much identical. Again, the Breitling just takes an edge. As we've said a million times before in various reviews, they have their own special dedicated testing facilities in Le Champ de Fonds in Switzerland to make sure that all of their watches are chronometer certified. So let's move on to brand history and prestige. Now, of course, there's no doubt about it, Breitling wins here again. If we look on the back, we see there Breitling was founded in 1884. They have an incredible long history to their name, many iconic watches. Also, we have to mention the American astronaut Scott Carpenter wearing a Breitling Navitimer in the Aurora 7 mission. Sinn, in comparison, started in 61. And although they've achieved so much with many fantastic, iconic as well watches to their name and achievements, you know, from being worn by astronauts, it pales in comparison to Breitling, which is just a juggernaut. Sinn is also highly renowned for their innovative technology that they have to offer, and is pretty unique to the brand, although sadly not much of it is present here in the 903. Sinn still very much make probably the most tool-tastic instrument watches around. Breitling has its roots, just like Sinn, making tool or instrument watches, and the Navitimer being the perfect example. It's taken on a more luxury status watch kind of role recently. It's ironic that the Navitimer was born into the 50s, where and it was quite ingenious, actually. We have to say that Breitling aimed the Navitimer at the commercial market, as there was a growing demand with the boom of diving and recreational aviation. Tool watches suddenly had more of a demand in the civilian market. So Breitling were quick to leap onto this demand, and hence, you know, so many watches, iconic divers and chronographs and all the rest of it being released during that time by not just Breitling, but obviously by so many brands. So one cannot deny the impact and influence Breitling have had in the history of watches and horology in general. I think the Sinn still gets an 8, very strong. It's recognized as an enthusiast brand, quite specialist. They have a really strong reputation for making quality German-made timepieces. So let's move on to quality, and this is a really interesting development here, because I really do feel that the Sinn is superior in the quality, not only the finish. If we look at the Navitimer, we have a high polish, pretty much all of it except for parts of the engraving. Mine is very scratched. I have worn the hell out of this, so but anyway, yeah, I'm a Navitimer guy. What can you say? Compare it to the Sinn. We've got so much more contrast in polishing. I mean, look at that brush sides. Also, the bracelet construction is incredible. We also have a display back, and everything has been decorated. I think no expense has been spared here with the Sinn. You feel the quality, and I gotta say, you know, side by side, and it pains me to say this, but the Sinn is better. It's just better made. The edges are sharper. The quality of the finish, it feels more substantial. I mean, yes, okay, it's on the bracelet, but I've also had this, or I've tested this without on a NATO strap. They're almost the same weight. However, the Breitling still scores a great 8. It's very much a luxury watch. I think the Breitling strength is that dial. It's something that Breitling do so well. Look at the Sinn. It also has an amazing detail. The printing is just beautifully done. As a complete package, I think the Sinn wins. Okay, now we move on to style. So this is purely aesthetics. Now, nobody gets a 10 here, because they are very much, you know, an acquired taste. If you're not into busy aviation watches, well, you're watching the wrong video, but the odds are, if you're watching this, you're into this kind of style of watch. And I got to admit, I'm never going to fly a plane. I have no intention to. I just love the look of them. I love the kind of romance of a bygone era where people actually use the logarithmic scales to do complications. Completely unnecessary today. The only thing I've ever calculated is the tip, how much to tip on a bill. I love chronographs. I love the layout. They both have a very nice symmetry. Obviously, there are loads of variations of the Navitimer. Aesthetically, they certainly tie here. While the Breitling has that beautiful winged logo applied in gold, the Sinn has the lovely 12, typical trope of aviation watches. Also, I love the anchor on the seconds hand. Wonderful detail, very endearing. It's little details like this that make a luxury watch in my opinion. While the Navitimer has the anchor, the Sinn has a blacked out date wheel, and I think that just makes the date window a little bit, yeah, it's the only thing that really breaks the balance of the dial. I just think it's more aesthetically pleasing when the date wheel is the same color as the dial. The Navitimer has stunning faceted applied indices. The Navitimer has polished, high polish hands on all the subdials and the main hands, of course. Whereas the Sinn is painted white, lovely high contrast to the dial. A little bit more or immediately legible at different angles. Now you can get variations in different colors of each watch. I've got to say the black of the Sinn is stunning. I love the little concentric circles and the recessed subdials. There's a wonderful amount of detail. It's quite dazzling. There is a subtle sunburst effect there. It's not as apparent as the Navitimer. The Navitimer, of course, has the contrasting scales there. Stylistically, they really don't differ that much. If you like one, you're undoubtedly going to like the other. They both have an alluring quality that just pulls you in. Okay, let's move on to versatility. Here, I think the Sinn slightly takes the edge. This particular black color scheme, although we have the lovely little dashes of red there on the seconds hand, black color scheme is certainly a little bit more compatible with more strap options. Although I have to say, the blue here is also quite fun. Black will always win, but then again you can get the black dial version of this particular watch. Versatility wise, the Sinn takes the edge only by 1 point, and I think mainly to do with its more robustness, its higher water resistance. It's going to be less of a worry in different situations. I tend to be concerned when wearing the Navi, even though the water resistance I think is about 30 meters on this. I just think that the Sinn, being 100 meters water resistant, you don't think about it, you don't worry about it. It also has the screw down crown, whereas the Breitling does not. It's just a more reassuring, and I think it's more compatible to a wider range of activities and situations. Let's move down to performance. Here, again, performance to me, I think, goes to the Sinn. While the Navitimer is chronometer certified and we have that accuracy, the Sinn has the better loom. I'll show you a loom shot now. 12 at the top just helps orientation instantly. Also, we have the quick set date, whereas the Breitling has a quite annoying way of setting the date. It's a bit of a laborious process. The Sinn also, I feel, with the internal rotating bezel, is just, if you are going to use that, it's so much more easier and quicker to use. The resistance based rotating bezel is a little bit dated. As I angle the watch, as you can see, both have anti-reflective coating and they do a fantastic job. Wonderfully domed sapphire glass. One area that the Breitling has a slight advantage is the shape of the crown. While the crown of the Sinn is fantastic and it threads beautifully, this slightly wider, flatter crown I think is easier when you want to manually wind it or set the time. Another advantage the Sinn has slightly over the Breitling, it has increased anti-magnetic protection. It's also more shock resistant. This is due to the higher standards that Sinn, they test all their watches, and like we talked about when I was reviewing and talking about the 104 here, Sinn, you know, they do a whole bunch of drop testing, all kinds of pressure testing. So the Sinn is performance-wise, it's more robust. In fact, actually, that nicely leads on to our next category, which is durability. Again, the Sinn takes the lead here, being more water-resistant with the screw-down crown, with the increased shock and anti-magnetic protection. It's certainly a tougher cookie than Navitimer here. The Navitimer, at the end of the day, is a very reliable timepiece. The Valjoux 7750 has been going since, I think it was introduced in '73. The 7750 clone in the Sinn was introduced in 2010. Although it's pretty much an identical clone, it's still not proven. I mean, we have yet to see if the Solitas can be as reliable and relied upon as the trusted, venerable 7750. Probably it will be. We've seen Solitas like the SW200 that was in my Aquas, for example, that was slightly modified and improved version of the ETA it was based on. This time it's just a straight clone. The advantage obviously is for manufacturers, they don't have to redesign their cases. And talking of cases, the Sinn is a little bit more substantial. Okay, moving on to XFactor. Now this is that special, inexplicable quality that sets it apart from other watches. The Navitimer, without a surprise, wins here. It is the status watch of the two. It's also been on the wrists of many, many people. I saw a fantastic picture of one of my heroes, Miles Davis, wearing he was a Navitimer guy, not to mention Seinfeld. I mean, it's been in a lot of movies. It's the icon, it's the original. The Sinn, no matter how much it tries, it can never replicate that. The Sinn does have a little bit of that magic. It's rubbed off, obviously, because it's such a faithful design, because it's allowed to be. I think the Sinn doesn't really fall behind too much because they're just so similar. At first glance, you think it's a Navitimer, and it's one of the very few times where it's cool because Sinn has the rights. It's not a homage, and it's obviously mistakenly. You know, a lot of people have that wrong misconception. It's an official, well, I can't call it the Navitimer, but it is just as legitimate as the Navitimer. So I think that's pretty much it. Let's have a look at the final scores. So, drum roll please. Well, no, sorry, that's unboxings, but yeah, let's have a look at the final scores. Wow, that's really interesting. So, the Sinn wins with 89, and my darling Navitimer following very closely behind at 84. Well, yeah, you can see that the Sinn is undoubtedly the better watch of the two. The Breitling Navitimer is the original. I guess its downfall is it hasn't really been updated. It's a little bit, you could say it's been resting on its laurels, perhaps. But yeah, if you are considering the two, I would have to say the Sinn is the better deal. It's the better watch. Or if you want the provenance and heritage and prestige and iconic status, you go for the Navitimer. It hasn't really made choosing between them any different. I mean, hopefully it might have helped you guys. If I had to buy it again, I'd still pick the Navitimer. But I guess it goes to show that, you know, if we break it down all the categories, the Sinn is the better watch, but favorite still is the Navitimer. Anyway, guys, really quite an interesting development there. Please don't forget to add your thoughts, queries, comments, opinions, all the rest of it down below, and also these scores that you got for each watch. Which one won for you? I'd really like to hear that. So thank you very, very much for watching. Please don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it and found it useful. And as always, guys, I will catch you in the next one. Okay, ciao.